All right, now we're going to discuss one of my favorite subjects, sugar. So let's take a look at what we're going to be discussing. Well, first of all, what is sugar and why do we care about it? Where do we find it? In what foods? How much is too much? And how can we limit our exposure so we're not taking in too much sugar? So let's see what the Lord's Word has to say about sugar. And it kind of does indirectly. It mentions that if you have found honey, eat only enough. In other verses, they talk about a land flowing with milk and honey. Okay, so in a way, we see that honey, which is almost completely sugar with a few trace mineral nutrients in it, honey is considered good, it tastes good. Yes, it's true, but eat only enough. Kind of reminds me of the verses we talked about with respect to meat, to the fatted calf. Something to be savored and to enjoy on occasion, not to excess. And I think that's a good perspective for us to take with respect to sugar in general. So let's go over some essential facts related to sugar. I know this is a little bit on a scientific kind of track, but let's see if we can work together on it. First of all, high blood levels of sugar, what we might call spikes, damage the lining of blood vessels and the organs they support. So guess what organs that is? All the organs. So we have to be careful for very high blood levels. Reasonable, moderate levels in the blood, the body has a way to take care of that. Sugar is sugar. Your body doesn't know the difference between added and natural sugar. I only say that because some things have a lot of natural sugar, and we do have to be careful for that. We're going to get to that in a few minutes. High fructose corn syrup is essentially the equivalent of sugar in the body, and we're going to talk about that in a little more detail. Simple carbs like white bread or white rice and potatoes are quickly converted to sugar in the body. They're almost the equivalent of sugar. Now, on the other hand, complex carbohydrates, whole grains, are slowly converted to sugar so they don't make those spikes we're trying to avoid. So what are some names for sugar? What are some various representations of sugar? Well, there are so many. Let's just take a look at a few. Sugar, regular granulated sugar, which is sucrose. Cane sugar, same thing. Honey, almost completely sugar. Agave nectar, fructose, which is a sugar. High fructose corn syrup, we already talked about. Which forms of these are healthy, are quote unquote good for you? None. Okay, so sugar is in a sense the ultimate form of empty calories. Now, sometimes empty calories are all right, especially like if we're in some kind of competitive situation. That's all that can be okay. You know, I'm sure you've heard of Gatorade. Gatorade is very high in sugar because people are competing, need to have that instant energy. But generally speaking, we want to avoid excess sugar because that's not good for us. So let's talk about the difference between table sugar and high fructose corn syrup. It's a little bit complicated, but I think you can follow me on this. Sucrose is regular sugar, cane sugar, and it's a 50-50 combination of glucose and fructose, whatever that is. Those are two what we call monosaccharides, but they're bound chemically together. It's a covalent link. Whereas high fructose corn syrup, and it depends on what number it is, but it's basically also a mixture of those two components, fructose and glucose, but here they're not chemically bound. The thing is, when sucrose, the one chemically bound, hits our GI tract, it automatically splits open, or there are enzymes that catalyze it splitting open. So it ends up as glucose and fructose. Bottom line is that they're essentially equivalent to the body. So I want you to keep that in mind. And there's a lot of controversy about it, but scientifically, HFCS is essentially the same as table sugar in terms of its interaction with the body. So what happens when a food that contains sugar or releases sugar is ingested? So this diagram is showing blood levels of sugar here versus time after eating the substance. Okay, so prior to eating the food, you see that we have a blood level of glucose, which is in what's called the normal or the healthy range here. Now, when we eat something like sugar itself, or a can of soda, for example, blood sugar goes up very quickly, and we get these levels which are higher than the safe level. All right, and then it begins to come down. Now, if we have food which is from a refined carbohydrate, let's say white bread or rice or potatoes, the levels also go up to concentrations in the blood which are not healthy. Okay, and that's opposed to having sugar which is released from, say, a whole grain, where the whole grain still is a form of carbohydrate, starch, which breaks down to make sugar, but the sugar is released slowly so that it stays within this optimal safe range. So it really depends on how the form of sugar in terms of its impact on our blood levels. And we want to be careful to avoid those spikes. So what happens when we take sugar? Now, the toxic consequences are very complicated, and I don't want to bore you with all this detail, but high blood glucose levels or hyperglycemia, what diabetic people have to deal with all the time, and what we might have to deal with on occasion when we have high levels of sugar intake, ends up forming something called advanced glycation end products, and there are other things that are other pathways that are formed, but these end products end up causing all this nasty kind of biochemical reaction to occur. And I'm not going to bore you with the details of it right now, but at the end of the line, see, we go from hyperglycemia to vascular complications. Bad news. Damage. The glucose, actually, the sugar actually bonds to molecules in the lining of the blood vessel, making them become stiff and hardened, impermeable, damaged. Okay, and all our organs have blood vessels, so it's a bad effect throughout the body. And this, what I'm just showing here, is how sugar is related to disease, sugar levels in the blood. Okay, so this is an article from New England Journal of Medicine, which actually shows that at above normal blood sugar levels are linked to dementia, and Alzheimer's disease being one form of dementia. So, well, I know these graphs are a little hard to understand, but suffice it to say that as your average blood glucose levels go up, your chances of getting dementia increase with that. Right? Not good. Now here's another article in the Harvard Health Letter, which says that eating too much sugar, added sugar, increases the risk of dying with heart disease. They're saying added sugar, which is true, but whatever kind of sugar it is, actually does increase your risk of heart disease. So this isn't just speculation. It's data to show there are adverse effects of high consumption of high amounts of sugar, or conversely having high blood levels of sugar. So you might say, but sugar is natural, isn't it? Yes, it is natural. A lot of things that are natural are not good for you. Arsenic's not good for you. Nicotine's not good for you. I can go on and on. Uranium's not good for you. But we have to keep in mind, the thing about the sugar is that you start out with, say, 10 pounds here going through this sugar mill, and it goes through all these different processes, blah, 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 and you end up with 1 pound of raw or refined sugar. So actually, it's concentrating it to such an extent that it can become nasty. Okay, if you were sitting here just chewing on a sugar cane, you wouldn't get anywhere near the level. That's the way the good Lord made it. You wouldn't get it anywhere near the level that it is when we've refined it. Okay, so it's not that it's making it more toxic. It's just making it more concentrated, more able to generate those high blood levels. So let's take a look at U.S. consumption, the typical consumption in the United States versus what the guidelines are from various health organizations. So we look at what the per capita sugar consumption is. We see, now here's teaspoons per day, and it's roughly 20 in grams per day. There's roughly 4 grams of sugar in a teaspoon or in a packet. So we can see that people are having maybe 75, I like to go by grams being a scientist, 75 grams or so. It goes up, it's got highest at year 2000, but it's pretty consistent, about 75 grams of sugar daily, right? And the World Health Organization and other organizations, the American Heart Association, other organizations have come up with limits that say 25 grams a day, or about 6 packets, is optimal. And 50 grams per day is what they say is acceptable. Not as good, because this isn't the kind of thing where you have a threshold, okay? It's some sugar is all right, but too much sugar is not good. So 50 grams per day, let's go with that, as that's a good number to keep our mind on. 50 grams per day is like the maximum that we'd want to have, okay? And again, that's total sugar. Your body doesn't really care how you're getting that in. It's total sugar. Now, the surprising thing is how much sugar is there in foods. And it's not what you would expect. So here is something called naked juice. And if you can see here, it says no sugar added. No sugar added, right? Well, that's a good thing. They say, well, no sugar added. That must mean it's like 0 sugar. I don't think so. It's got 47 grams of sugar per serving. You have 1 bottle of naked vegetable juice, and you're right at the edge of your maximum amount of sugar for the day. Okay, so that's a little bit surprising, but it's because that particular brand of juice has a lot of apple juice in it, and apple juice is very high in sugar. So there are other juices which have much lower amounts of sugar, but you have to look, you have to shop. So that's the critical thing, is this number of sugars. Natural or not, 47 grams of sugar is not good for you. Now, here's something which is certainly not natural, right? Pepsi. So if I was to have asked you the question, which had more sugar, you'd almost certainly think the Pepsi. But the Pepsi has 34 grams. 34 grams compared to 47 grams for a single serving of sugar soda versus naked juice. Okay, so it's just a matter of keeping it in mind. Soda is not good for you either. But virtually all sodas, except those that have artificial sweeteners, are going to have high levels of sugar. So that's a given. Whereas juices, you've got to shop around a little bit. Now, I will tell you, the ones that aren't as sweet don't taste as good, but that takes a little getting used to. There's ways to deal with that. I want to share with you a couple of my personal choices for having low sugar foods where the general food product itself has high levels of sugar. So let's look at yogurt, which could often have 30 grams of sugar in a serving, and the Chobani non-fat plain Greek yogurt has 4 grams, not bad at all. And then I use Fairlife milk, which has 6 grams of sugar, where most milks have about 11 grams. That's not really a high number. It's not that much of a problem, but I like to try to cut it down as much as possible. And then here is Suja, which is a vegetable juice that has only about 4 grams of sugar per serving. Now let me also say something about the Suja juice here. You see that contains the juice from quite a number of really what I'll call healthy vegetables, cruciferous type vegetables, those vegetables that are very bitter. Well, I happen to have the genetic composition that really has a problem with bitter foods, with vegetables. It really is extremely distasteful to me. So although I know intellectually I should eat vegetables, I find it very difficult to do, frankly. And so rather than turn to supplements, I like to use the intermediate, the juice, which is not as good as the entire vegetable, but I think has more of the essential components than just eating, just ingesting tablets, vitamins. So those are just some examples to help you out. But the bottom line is always look at the label. Let's compare fruit juice versus fruit in terms of the amount of sugar that's in these products. So here's a nice glass of orange juice, 8-ounce glass. How much sugar do you think is in there? Well, let's take a look. Sugar, 23 grams, okay? And let's compare that to how much sugar is in an orange. All right, here's a nice healthy orange, 9 grams. So it's roughly 2.5 times, maybe 3 times as much sugar in the glass of orange juice as there is in the orange. Fine to have a glass of orange juice now and then, no problem. But it really is healthier to have the orange. Not only do you reduce the total amount of sugar, but you also have the dietary fiber in the orange that helps slow down the absorption of the sugar. And this is just showing you the amount of sugar in various products by looking at how many cubes of sugar are equivalent in there. And some things, of course, you would expect. Okay, you would imagine that sugar is in soft drinks, no question. But here, look, Red Bull, Snapple, look at how much is in Snapple. Oreo, wow, look at how much sugar is in ice cream, Haagen-Dazs ice cream. And surprisingly, there's even sugar in tomato sauce and in Jell-O, although you can get that without sugar, but regular Jell-O. Now, tomato sauce, I'm going to just mention that if you shop around, you can find tomato sauce that has lower amounts of sugar, okay? So it's worth looking at the label. Look at the label. Well, what are some sugar substitutes? I know this is a controversial area. Some people want to stay away from sugar substitutes altogether. I know. But I'm telling you, as a trained toxicologist, it's going to sound strange, but I, in many cases, would rather have this sugar substitute than the equivalent amount of sugar. I feel sugar is that bad for you. So if we look at this, we see that aspartame is very common. I'm sure you've seen that. Sucralose is also very common. That's nice in the sense that you can cook and bake with it. The one that I tend to favor is stevia. And yes, it is quote unquote natural, but that's the one I use most. Again, I do want to say, and I know it's controversial, maybe you might disagree, all these sugar substitutes have gone through batteries of toxicological testing and been shown to be safe. Testing that sugar would never make it through if it was given in the high doses that are given in animal studies with sugar substitutes. Let me give you an example. Let's look at soda that has sugar in it and soda that's sweetened with an artificial sweetener, aspartame in this case, NutraSweet, and say how much of each one of those can you ingest before you reach what are the recommended limits based on various organizations' suggestions for the limits. Well, regular sugar, believe it or not, you can have 1 not even one whole can of sugar. It's got about 40 grams of sugar in it. So if you want to limit yourself to 25 a day, you couldn't quite have 1 can of sugar and you'd be at the recommended limit. Now, how about the limit for diet soda? Well, you can have, how many, 5, 10, 15, 20, 23 cans of diet soda that's sweetened with aspartame before you reach the safety limit. Okay, so I know this is a debatable thing and people would argue about it, but if I was going to have soda, when I have soda, I will go with the diet soda. Again, that's really up to you. And ultimately, the best thing would be not to have soda at all, maybe just have sparkling water. Now, generally speaking, the other problem with sugar is sugar has partners in crime. Sugar you often find with fats and salts together, fats and salt, okay? Because the three of them together really have a way of lighting up people's taste buds. And where do you find them? In things called processed foods. Processed foods is something, they're something we really want to try to avoid. And so usually where we find sugar, we find fats, and they almost always what we call saturated or trans fats, which are bad. We're going to get to that later in the course. And salt, which salt is not too bad, but we don't want to have excess. Okay, let's summarize and kind of put together what's the best way to deal with sugar. Number 1, avoid processed foods and sugary soda. 2, eat fruit instead of drinking the fruit juice. 3, have carbohydrates as long as they're whole grain carbohydrates. Okay, and it usually says that right on the label, in which case sugar is released slowly. And lastly, read the labels. Okay, choose the food that has the lowest amount of sugar. All right, my friends, great being with you. Next time, we're going to move on to talk a little bit more about dietary components. God bless.